Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. So, I'm going to start in a bad place and move you to what I hope is a good place. And I'm going to start with the fact that we are really in what my mother would have called a mell of a hess in the world right now. And it's frightening. And things are, I feel like the whole world's full of spinning plates. And everybody's trying to manage that as best they can. So, one of the things I really noticed about all the questions you asked is that people want to know how the Iran war is going to end, whether there'll be an election, whether the SAVE Act's going to pass, and so on and so forth. And you want me to predict the future. And, my big thing is we don't know what the future is going to look like. We have the capacity to change the future. So I'm not really going to be able to lay your mind to rest on specific things, but maybe I will be able to about processes. So I'm going to start first of all with the big bad news, and that's that in the United States of America, we are seeing a radical right what fascist movement coming together and really trying to exert its authority over the United States of America. And I'm going to talk about how that is. But before I talk about that, I want to emphasize that this is a very small movement. There is not, as with all right wing reactionary movements, it doesn't have a lot of adherents. But they are able to project the position that there are more of them than there are. And crucially, in the United States, because of the 2024 election and because of the situation in the media before the 2024 election, they have managed to grab hold of the key pieces of our democracy. So the people who look at democracies and their health are looking at the United States right now and are shocked at the degree to which we have fallen away from being a democracy, which, by the way, was teetering, has been teetering for a while anyway. But they're shocked at how fast our democracy is degrading into um, either competitive authoritarianism or, a different system where we really don't get to choose our leaders. And so there aren't that many people behind this, but they're in crucially important places. So when I say that they're trying to consolidate in this movement, what am I talking about? So you've heard me talk before about how there are all these different flavors of MAGA republicanism. And that they're sort of fellow travelers, but they didn't necessarily all come together to do the same thing. So, for example, you have the tech bros who joined onto the Trump train late in 2024. People like Elon Musk, for example, or Peter Thiel, who is sort of the mentor and the sponsor of JD Vance, and they joined into that because they really wanted to get rid of regulation and of taxes because they wanted to be able to run their businesses however they wished and felt like the laws that the Congress had put in place to protect women and the environment and people of color and so on, and the taxes that those programs cost were stopping them from being able to create this brilliant fantasy future that to which they imagine they will someday um, go. So you have the tech bros, but they're sort of fellow travelers to the white nationalists who are really interested in taking over the federal government and making it even stronger than it is now in order to force a theocracy essentially on the rest of us. And then there's sort of the business people who went along with MAGA because they didn't like taxes and they didn't like regulation, and they wanted access to the kind of government contracts that really make up a number of defense businesses, for example, or people like Elon Musk. And then you had people like Donald Trump who were in there because they wanted power and they wanted to stay out of jail. And all of those people kind of were in the leadership, while you then had at the lower levels of the Trump train the true believers, the MAGAs, and I'll separate them off in a second from the people who voted for Trump in 2024. But the MAGAs who are sort of feeling religiously and culturally left behind, and so they just like Trump. They feel that he speaks for them and they don't pay any attention to what he actually does. He's kind of their avatar, if you will. And they voted for him in 2024. And then you also had, along with them, a number of people who were frustrated by the economy overwhelmingly, and maybe had not paid a lot of attention to the to politics before that, and who also were paying a lot of attention to what we now call the manosphere. Now, the reason I laid all those out is one of the things that you see if you're watching people like G. Elliott Morris, who writes Strength in Numbers, is that those people, the last group that I mentioned, young Americans and Latinos, have turned their backs on Trump. They have fallen away from him in that part of the coalition, which was a crucial part of the ability of Trump to be elected in 2024 and of the Republicans to take the ground that they did in 2024. So what does that leave? That leaves a base of people like Stephen Miller, who wants to create a white nationalist society, Russell Vogt, who wants to create a theocracy, the Trumps and Donald Trump especially, who are interested in increasing their own power, and the tech bros who want contracts and they want to be able to do whatever they want in their companies. And the problem for them is that they no longer have the numbers to make their wishes come true. And they also don't always agree on stuff. So while the some of that coalition wants to have a weaker government, other members of that coalition want to have a stronger government. So what you're seeing here, especially as frustration grows with the Trump administration, is a fight over MAGA. And this is not, by the way, one of the things that you see is people talking about there being a split in the MAGA movement. And most people who look at this say that people who are committed to Donald Trump as voters are still committed to him. They're not going anywhere. They're in. But what you, I think, are seeing right now is an attempt on the part of the leadership to try and move that coalition in one direction or in another. Like, who's going to get control of that base group, especially as Trump is becoming so desperately unpopular. So there are a number of pieces that moving that base one direction or another that you're seeing play out, especially over things like the war in Iran. And what I mean by that is that a number of the people who joined in with Trump, especially in 2024, called themselves America Firsters. They believed in America first, and they were isolationists. That meant they wanted the United States to stop having foreign entanglements with things like NATO and the UN and so on. And they certainly did not want foreign wars. So Trump has been actually extraordinarily active in striking other countries. And now, of course, he has embroiled the United States in what is now a 20-day war so far in Iran, alongside of Israel. And that war is spreading. It's spread into different countries in the region, especially at this point, Lebanon, which Israel has begun to, not begun, it's been there for a number of days now, has been striking and has been attacking to the point that there are more than 1 million refugees now in Lebanon. And this has, and I will talk a little bit more about the war and what that means, but this has created a real rift among the leadership of MAGA. And that leadership is dividing now between Trump and those who are opposed to getting involved in Iran. And a lot of that is mostly because they're looking at this war and thinking this is a crap show. We don't want any part of this. So the reason I'm identifying that right now is because you've got some MAGA leaders like Donald Trump, who's out there today, for example, trying to convince the America Firsters that going to war in another country means America first, because he's trying to say, otherwise we would have been in a nuclear holocaust, which, by the way, there is not an intelligence person in the United States who has made that argument. They have all said that Iran was a number of years, more than a decade, from achieving nuclear capabilities and achieving the delivery system. Those two things people often don't realize are very different stories. But Trump and his people are now sort of retconning the war to say, oh, this was always about America first. This was about making sure that the United States would never be caught in a nuclear holocaust. That's a word actually that Trump used yesterday against, coming from Iran. So they're now trying to say that they had to go to war with another country in order to be America first. It's going to be kind of a hard sell, really, right? And you can see Trump kind of dancing around this because today he said, well, I'm not going to put American soldiers on the ground in Iran, but then he left room that he could. And then on the other side of that equation, you have the MAGA people, the MAGA leaders who are trying to say, hey, we wanted no part of this trip into Iran. And crucially, and this is the reason that I wanted to mention it, is because what they are trying to argue is rather than saying Trump's an idiot because they want to pick up those voters, they're saying Israel dragged the United States into this war. And that is feeding in MAGA something that was already there and has been growing since the murder of Charlie Kirk, a real base of anti-Semitism. That, if you remember, after Charlie Kirk died, there was a big fight to take over his listeners. And what it appears has happened is that a farther right social media figure has gotten a lot of those followers. So the followers for MAGA have been shifting further and further right. And this anti-Semitism just plops down right over that. There's also increasing Islamophobia in that group of people as well. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is because it feels to me like that group is hardening, and it's hardening around fascism for sure, but also fascism that is quite openly anti-Semitic. We know about the anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and anti-women. So you've seen the different pieces of Project 2025 gradually come into being, and now you've got a new plan coming out from the same people about a future for America that involves essentially a very Nazi-looking plan for American women, white women. For white women, they're supposed to be producing more babies. They're not supposed to work outside the home, and so on. You're also seeing this attempt on the part of the MAGA people to do things that were in Project 2025, like get rid of the Department of Education. And you may or may not have noticed today that the Treasury Department is taking over some of the loan system from the Department of Education. This is because they want to get rid of the Department of Education. And as part of that, they also are trying to switch our education system from public schools to these voucher systems that support overwhelmingly Christian schools, evangelical Christian schools. So there is that. There is also the attempt on the part of Trump MAGA Republicans to define anybody who disagrees with the president as being a member, supporting terrorism. And I've written a couple of times about this. You may or may not have noticed that, and it's very confusing in the news, that you see reports that people like Kristi Noem, former Homeland Security Secretary, called people like Alex Preddy or Renee Good domestic terrorists. They actually didn't, because a domestic terrorist has a very clear definition in American law, and they didn't meet it at all. You have to, I don't remember all the details of it, but there's very specific things you have to do. And the fact that they were, filming ICE is or helping somebody up off the ground has nothing to do with that. So what happened is that shortly after Trump began to bomb the small boats in the Caribbean, which was on September 2nd. And by the way, I do keep these numbers in my head, but it's not a bad idea to remember a few of them, because they end up turning out to be important. And September 2nd, I think, is going to be one of the important ones, because that's that first strike on those boats. And there, of course, have been dozens since. But that first one, it was the double tap, and a lot of stuff changed around then. I suspect this is going to be one of those dates that shows up. in history books. But anyway, so they started bombing those boats, and the administration very quickly after that, Trump announced that he would designate Antifa as a major terrorist organization, as a domestic terrorist organization. Now, the president has no authority to do that. He can designate foreign terrorist organizations, but not domestic terrorist organizations, because it's a no-brainer, right? It would just be a question of time until the president just declared political opponents domestic terrorists. And so he said he was going to do that. And then 3 days after he was going to do that, he issued a national security presidential memorandum, and so NSPM. And often you see like National Security Council memos or whatever will have those initials, and sometimes they get separated off, so you think, I don't know what they're talking about. In this case, NSPM literally stands for National Security Presidential Memorandum. And NSPM 7, which was called Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. I'm sorry, let me say that again. Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. First of all, called for a national joint terrorism task force to investigate Americans who were engaging in protest, and also ordered the Attorney General of the United States to use the maximum to prosecute any kind of protest of the federal government, including ICE or Border Patrol, as a federal crime to the maximum extent that was permissible by law. So this got tested very recently in Texas, when there was a protest on July 4th in Texas. And the protesters who were there didn't all know each other. But one of the protesters standing a distance away from the place where the protest was taking place, and the protesters, I think they spray painted a car, and they were doing stuff. But one of the protesters, a little bit away from the others, shot a police officer in the shoulder. It was non-fatal injury, but shot a police officer in the shoulder. And the government prosecuted 9 of those protesters, again, some of whom didn't know each other, as part of an Antifa cell that was engaged in terrorism. Now, Trump's own handpicked director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Christopher Wray, said that Antifa is not a thing, and it's really not. It stands for anti-fascist, and it's a label that Trump is trying to make real on different groups of protesters. They prosecuted these people as part of a terror cell using these broad anti-terrorism laws. And the jury on last Friday, I think, I've lost track even of what day it is, found these 9 people guilty of engaging in a number of different activities associated with participating in terrorism, even though one of the people wasn't even there, but was married to one of those protesters. And this is a big deal because it is a tool, obviously, to silence protest, rather than going after the one person who shot the police officer and the other people for vandalism or whatever they engaged in. They got them all together as part of a conspiracy. And a conspiracy is part of this idea that they are a terror cell. And this is deeply, deeply, deeply concerning, because the idea, of course, is to stifle people's willingness to protest, because they don't want to get caught up in the idea that they might be part of a terror cell and get the book thrown at them the way these 9 people did. So all of those things are designed really to stifle dissent and to center power in the government. And then, of course, we have the SAVE Act. And the SAVE Act is, very obviously an attempt to stop people from voting. As many as 21 million Americans will not have the documents they need to vote under the current plan for the SAVE Act. The House has passed, just so you know, the House has passed one version of the law. Trump wants a much stronger version of the law through the Senate, and then it would have to go back to the House. So when people say, is it going to do this? Is it going to do that? We don't know, because it's going to go back and forth between the houses. if it passes the Senate. And right now, it doesn't even have a majority vote in the Senate for the simple reason, as some of you asked, won't it hurt Republicans as much as it hurts Democrats? And the answer to that is it might hurt them more, because if you look at the demographics of who is voting for Democrats versus who is voting for Republicans in this moment, the people who are still firmly in Trump's camp tend to be less educated, less wealthy, more rural. And, the chances of them having passports, for example, are going to be less than the chances of wealthy white Americans who travel. So the Senate, I think, is very aware of that. But Trump has taken it in his mind to say, I can't, I got to get rid of voters in order to get elected. So that's the bad picture that I wanted to show you. The fact you've got this hardening of the MAGA Republicans who have taken over the Republican Party around sort of the white nationalism, the anti-immigrant, the violence, the cruelty, the anti-Semitism, the Islamophobia, the anti-women stuff. And they've got this real attempt in the courts to stop anybody from protesting them and to make sure they can't vote. Mind you, the SAVE Act has not passed yet. And I guess the next thing I should say is, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? But I set it up that way because I wanted you to see to make sure that you are very aware that it's a very precarious time. Things are in incredible trouble. But this is an extraordinarily vulnerable regime at this point. It is not hardened into place. And you see this fight, by the way, all the time on social media between Tom Nichols, who's a writer for The Atlantic, and he gets into fights all the time with people who say we're living in a fascist state. And he keeps saying, no, we're not. We have a fascist government, but we do not yet have a fascist state. And how do you know that? What is the difference between those two things? In a true fascist state, I would not be here talking to you. I'd probably be in prison, actually. You wouldn't be able to speak out. People would be disappearing off the streets and so on. That is not where we are yet. Although every historian will tell you, the dominoes are dropping and we got to stop these dominoes from doing that. So right now, this administration is incredibly fragile. And let's start, first of all, with the Iran war. And the more we learn about that, the more it appears that what Trump was trying to do was simply to go run in and run out the same way he did in Venezuela, decapitate the regime, and put in place somebody who'd be willing to work with the United States of America. Sort of the thing that Vladimir Putin tried to do in Ukraine in 2022. Although he was going to install his own person there, Trump has sort of gone with a different model to grab the state and get stuff from them by letting the people choose the next person in line, even if that person leaves the same regime in place, as he intended to do in Venezuela, and as it appears he is now interested in doing in Cuba. That, of course, is not how it happened. That even with the help of Israel, and by the way, it is very clear that Israel did, in fact, want to go to war and wanted to get the United States involved. I am not giving Donald Trump a pass on this idea that the most powerful man in the world was sort of tricked into going into war or led into going to war. I'm not going. That's not. I don't. Yes, they went in together, but I'm not giving Donald Trump a pass on that. He was the most powerful man in the world and he chose to do it. So this MAGA thing that you're seeing out there, well, he got tricked into going into war, or Netanyahu forced him to. Like, Netanyahu's no good guy, let me tell you, but Trump did this, and that's important to remember. And it's not going well. The more we learn that he didn't tell anybody. He had no plan for what was going to happen. He had no goals, because all he really wanted to do was have a dramatic show of force that might help his terrible job approval ratings, and to get rid of the Ayatollah who he couldn't work with, or he didn't think he could work with, because now it turns out, it appears that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the people who were negotiating for the United States of America, although neither one of them has been elected or they're special envoys, that they didn't have enough background knowledge to understand that what the Iranians laid on the table was a negotiating position. They thought that they don't have enough skill in negotiating, which by the way is a skill. You don't just like you have to learn how to do it. Um, you have to go to school to do it, and you don't get it naturally. There's different language and so on. So he went in without any planning, without any goals, and of course, the first thing that happened was exactly what every war game said was going to happen. Iran took control over the Strait of Hormuz. And it increasingly looks as if they did not take military control of it. It doesn't look as if there are mines there. All they had to do really was threaten to put mines there, because you can't move a tanker without insurance. And an insurance company is not going to move a tanker if there's a chance that there's a mine in the water. Similarly, they don't have to run the drones. They can just threaten to run the drones, because nobody wants to insure a tanker that is full of oil and might get struck with explosives. So they shut down the Strait of Hormuz mostly. They have let some tankers through, including some of their own. But what this has done is it's strangled oil around the globe. And I've talked a lot about that and the different kinds of oil and why the U.S. Can't use its own oil and so on. But the important piece here, in terms of the argument that I'm building in this talk, is that the price of oil has skyrocketed. Brent crude, there's two ways to measure oil in the oil markets, and one of them is Brent crude. And anything over 100 is just like, it makes your teeth ache. And it was as high as $119 a barrel today. It came down a little bit by the end of the day. But what that means, first of all, is that the world markets in gasoline and in heating oil and in diesel and in the things that run manufacturing plants all just skyrocketed. The average cost of gasoline in the United States has jumped, I believe it's more than 80 cents a gallon now since February 27th. You can watch that, by the way. The AAA keeps a running tally of that. I'm sorry, the automobile, what does AAA stand for? American Automobile Association. And there's a Gas Buddy does as well. And those are the two things that people watch. But this is like crazy problematic for the world economy, but certainly for the United States economy. And let me go down to this argument I'm making to Donald Trump himself, because the whole point of a lot of the voters who sided with him in 2024 over Biden was they wanted prices to come down, because prices had skyrocketed after the pandemic lockdown, because of the fact there was pent-up demand, because of the fact there were supply chain problems. All of a sudden, when you try and start the world up again after something like that, prices go through the roof. They did come down. I mean, by the time Biden left office, they were about where the Fed likes them to be, which is at about 2%. They were at about 2.5, 2.9. Under Trump, they've gone up every single month, because he didn't really have any plan to make inflation come down. He just wanted to get elected. So he told everybody he was going to bring inflation down. Instead, what you have seen as of February, which was last month, the numbers came out Tuesday. And today's Wednesday. So they came out. Yeah, I guess that's right. They came out yesterday. I'm sorry, I've lost track of time, because today's Thursday. They came out Tuesday. What you saw with those is that inflation under Trump really jumped in February. And I don't remember off the top of my head the number. I think it was 3.4%. It might have been 3.7, but it was a lot. And that was before you had to start factoring in the price of gasoline and the price that it's going to take to get food to market and goods to market, because diesel is crazy expensive all of a sudden, and that's going to be priced into the products that people buy. So this war in Iran has caused a huge problem. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the issues with it, and I've talked about the dead, and it's just what do they call it, a dumpster fire inside every disaster you can think of. But if you're thinking about what's happening politically, that is a huge problem for the Trump administration, because they've got this war now and they don't have a way to solve it. So you saw Trump desperately trying to browbeat allies and partners into joining on the side of the United States. And they were like, excuse me? You've been crapping on us now for years and saying you didn't need us and so on and so forth. And now you want us to go put our people in harm's way for a war that you started without consulting anybody? Just a minute. I need to go rearrange my sock drawer, right? So today, a number of European countries and Japan put out a statement in which it's really interesting because they put out a statement in which they did not say we're going to help Donald Trump at all. But what they did do was they issued a statement that said Iran must stop blocking the Strait of Hormuz. And you think, okay, well, they're siding with the US. Not so much. What they said in the statement was the freedom of the seas is central to the the United Nations, and the Iranians are stopping that, and they must cut it out. And that's different than saying we're going to work with Trump. That's saying we believe in the UN. We believe in countries working together. And one of the central pillars of the United Nations was the idea of freedom of the seas. And the reason for that is because if you have freedom of the seas, then goods can travel freely and prices stay down. And as prices stay down, you get the ability for food, for example, to travel around the country, for grain to go to Africa and to Asia. And that was a really interesting statement for them. And, one of the things we're living with is this idea that we have the international order is changing, but it's not necessarily just falling apart the way Trump would like it to. You've also got countries reasserting global trade and things like freedom of the seas. But Trump, he doesn't know what he's doing. And now you've got the Department of Defense under Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth asking for $2 billion in supplemental funding for the Department of Defense. And today, when reporters asked why he needed that much money for a war that Trump keeps saying is over or going to be ending, and this is not a direct quote, but it's close to it, Hegseth said it takes a lot of money to kill bad guys, which is not what one would call a detailed budget. So the idea that the American people are going to say, oh, yeah, we didn't really care about healthcare, and we didn't really care about education, and we didn't really care about all the stuff you're cutting. What we really do care about is tax cuts for billionaires and another $200 billion on top of the extraordinary amount that the Republicans under Donald Trump have poured into the Department of Defense. Yeah, that's going to be a really hard sell. The idea that Americans are going to want to do that is going to be a really hard sell. At the same time, we still have the Department of Homeland Security shut down, which means FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, TSA, Transportation Security Administration. Those are the people who check you in to make sure you're safe at the airport. The Coast Guard. Those parts of the Department of Homeland Security, the Republicans are refusing to fund because they understand that the Democrats won't fund Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and Border Patrol, giving them yet more money, because remember, they injected all that extra money into them last July. They won't do that until there's reforms. No masks. You got to stop doing these warrantless breaking into homes. You can't, you got to stop, doing the extra legal stuff you're doing and so on. So at the same time, the TSA lines are out of control, and our Coast Guard is not getting paid, and FEMA's not getting paid, and our TSA agents aren't getting paid. In order to force through more money for the Department of Homeland Security, now you've actually got the Defense Secretary saying, "Oh, by the way, can you just cut me a check for $200 billion?" And that's not going to be popular. So that's another way in which I think we're going to see some pushback. But you're seeing it in a lot of other places too. So, for example, the chair of the Fed, Lawrence Powell, Larry Powell, Lawrence, not Lawrence. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. It's been a very long day. Come on, why can't I think of it? Can someone throw it in the, it's not. Anyway, he was supposed to step down as the chair of the Fed. Remember, this is the guy that Trump has gone after. Jerome, thank you, Jerome Powell. Why did I say Larry? It's not, I'm sorry, Jerome Powell. I know why. Lawrence Powell is one of the conspirators who conspired to assassinate Lincoln. So, of course, that's the place I first go. I'm sorry, Jerome Powell, who did not conspire to assassinate Lincoln. He has announced that rather than stepping down as chair, as his term comes up, I think at the end of May or the beginning of May, sometime in there, he says, I'm staying. I'm staying until we get a number of things settled in the Fed. So that news has changed, I think, because there is an increasing understanding that this administration is off the rails. But you're seeing a lot of other pushback as well. So one of the things that that jumped out to me the other day was on the 17th of March, which was St. Patrick's Day as well as Evacuation Day. There was an Irish leader in the White House, and Trump started his whole thing about how Europe's going to disappear unless you get rid of all your immigrants. That sort of great replacement theory, white nationalist crap he's getting from Stephen Miller that fits so well into his own worldview. The guy pushed back. He said, no, actually, we need more immigrants. We need more innovation. Europe's a great place. And to speak back to Trump in the White House is new. I mean, there are other people, I'm sure, who have stepped on his toes a little, but that was Trump's central piece. And you can sort of see, you can watch clips of this. He doesn't quite know what to do. And I'm going to get these a little bit out of order now from the way I had intended to say them, because it seems like a good place to transition to. Trump is mentally falling apart. You can see it. You can see the vagueness. You can see the fact he called Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, the president of the United States the other day. You can see it in these rants that you're seeing on social media. You can see it in sort of his really inappropriate behavior. You can see that he's not all there. So when this guy spoke up to him and sort of pushed back, he didn't argue. He just kind of sat back like, oh, this is new. So you're starting to see people push back, but not just this gentleman who was in the Oval Office. What was really surprising to me about yesterday and today is there were a number of hearings on Capitol Hill of Trump administration figures. And the Democrats were really aggressive in their questioning. Some of the Republicans were too. And I don't know if you remember, but I kept saying the minute that Trump starts to lose people around him, like Kristi Noem, it's going to weaken him. And with that weakening, you're going to see more pressure on him and on the people around him. And that was clear in spades yesterday. So let me give you a list of some of those things. First of all, Pam Bondi, Attorney General of the United States, who seems pretty clearly to be running a cover-up of the Epstein files. And I hope I remember to speak more about the Epstein files in a minute. The Committee on Oversight and Reform in the House of Representatives, that's the one that's overseen by James Comer, a Republican of Kentucky, the guy I keep referring to as dumber than a haddock. His committee, a number of Republicans on his committee, at the beginning of March, subpoenaed Pam Bondi to appear before the committee to talk about the release of the Epstein files. Because remember, she was supposed to release all of those Epstein files by December 19th, and they haven't released half of them. And they've got one BS excuse after another for why not. And finally, I think there were 5 Republicans, don't quote me on that, but there were a number of Republicans on the committee who said, okay, we're willing to subpoena her and put her under oath. Okay, we're going to put her under oath, which is, one of the things that has been a problem for bringing accountability is that the administration, it hasn't been under oath. Now you could argue, in a number, and certainly they're not under oath when they're in front of TV cameras, but you could argue that there are ways that you could still prosecute somebody for that, for sure. But if somebody has sworn an oath to tell the truth and they don't, that's a pretty fast ticket to perjury, right? So theoretically, she's supposed to appear on April 14th under oath to answer questions about the Epstein files. And yesterday, she went in front of the Oversight and Reform Committee as just a hearing. So she wasn't sworn in. And this was supposed to be the committee's opportunity to ask her questions. And the Democrats just sat there and said, are you going to testify under oath? Are you going to come back for your subpoena? And she wouldn't answer. She wouldn't answer. So finally, the Democrats walked out, especially after Comer referred to Summer Lee, who's a Democrat from Pennsylvania. She kept saying that, and he actually used the word that she was bitching. This is one of his colleagues. Can you imagine? So the Democrats walked out, and I wanted to quote for you and you can find this, by the way. Maxwell Frost is a young senator, House of Representative, a representative from Florida, crackerjack smart. I did an interview with him, I don't know, a little bit ago about the Epstein files, which is really informative. I highly recommend it. But he came out into the cameras and he said, we asked Pam Bondi multiple times, are you going to come and speak with us under oath? She wouldn't say yes. And the reason that we want her under oath, and this he said, we want her under oath because we do not trust her. Why don't we trust her? Because she's a liar. I mean, that's pretty strong language that the Democrats are finally coming out in front of the cameras and saying. So now that's hanging out there. At the same time, you've got the report that I wrote about, I guess it was last night, that the Department of Justice appears also to be covering up a drug investigation, drug prostitution and money laundering investigation into Epstein and 14 accomplices. So all that Epstein stuff is out there too, and the Democrats are calling it out. But that's not it. I wanted to quote something else that honestly made me laugh out loud when I saw it. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, was testing in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And she, Angus King from Maine, he's an independent from Maine, is, he's a smart guy too. And he's very thorough in the work he does. And he's really, really unhappy he's also on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he's really unhappy, or at least he appears to be, about what's going on with the United States and the everything. But he's really upset about Hegseth and the Geneva Conventions that Hegseth appears to be ignoring, and he's always trying to get him on the record. So, and I'm not going to quote this directly, but Senator King asked Tulsi Gabbard if Russia was sharing intelligence with Iran. And she says, well, I can't tell you that. I'd have to tell you that in a closed session. And King says, well, wait, it's publicly reported in the newspapers. And she said, well, I still can't talk to you about it. And he said, is it happening? It's in the newspapers. This is not secret. And she said, I'd have to tell you that in private, but I can tell you that, and this is almost a quote, what I can say is that according to the Department of War, any support Iran is receiving is not inhibiting operational effects. That is, I can't tell you they're giving that Russia's giving Iran information, but if they were, it's not stopping the efforts of the Department of War. And King goes, that's sort of the first cousin of yes, I guess. And I just love that he was like, this is crap. Like, he's like, you basically are BSing me. And again, this is a senator who's known for, I mean, he has strong principles, but he basically just called her out on that. I'm not done yet. Also yesterday, Ron Wyden called out Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, because the FBI has been very clear until 2023 that it was not accessing location information about Americans. In order to get that kind of information, the government has to go to a judge and get a warrant to say, we need to know where Heather Richardson is because we think she's doing something nefarious. And the judge says, okay, and signs it. These are not terribly hard to get, but they're not that common either. Wyden asked Patel to commit to saying that the government was not buying Americans' location data from private companies. And Patel said that he does, in fact, access commercially available information about American citizens. That is, the FBI is buying private information about its citizens on the market, rather than going through a judge, simply buying it and having it as if they were, a private organization, which is just a crazy violation of the Fourth Amendment, which protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. And Wyden called that out and said, we simply must have laws around this because this is crazy that your government can buy this stuff from you. But then there was more than one thing. No, I guess there was yet one other thing, and that's that yesterday in the committee in the Senate on Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma, the senator from Oklahoma, who Trump is trying to get through the nomination process in order to become the next Secretary of Homeland Security. The chair of that committee is Rand Paul and from Kentucky. And Rand Paul and Mullin don't like each other. And there's this incredible scene where Mullin defended. There was this thing a while back where Paul got into a fight with his neighbor and there was an altercation and so on. And Mullin went in front of the TV cameras repeatedly to say that, this is a reasonable way to solve these issues. And Paul really took him to task for that. And Mullin responded, well, I was just saying that that there are other ways to handle things like, the dueling is always an option. And he goes on and Paul goes, dueling has been illegal for 170 years. Like, what are you talking about? And what he was really doing, and he continued to go on for the rest of the hearing, was saying, I don't have faith in any person who is this prone to violence and this, to put him over a department that is already in trouble for its violence. And it was kind of a calling out of the whole Trump thing, the idea that, as long as you were going to be out there and swagger and throw your fists, that you were somebody who should run things. And Paul pushed back on that, which was really interesting. He's a Republican, of course. He's not a Democrat. And Mullin did make it through the committee. Now he's going to go in front of the whole Senate. But he only got through the committee thanks to the vote of Fetterman, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, who voted in favor of him. The vote was 8-7. That was, I think, today. So there are all these different ways in which people are pushing back against what Trump is doing that may not seem like they're a big deal, because you sit there and think, what does it matter that King has said that? It matters because they're slowing stuff up, they're calling it out, and they're making Americans aware of what is going on. And that's really, really important, because the more that Americans understand what's going on, the more they don't like it. Especially now with prices going up over the Iran war, especially with the many different ways in which we're increasingly concerned about our safety in this country, about the destruction of our international alliances and partnerships, and so on. So what I see in this moment is this small group of people who's trying to consolidate power, and they might. I mean, they're really, they're going after us, but increasingly, we are seeing allies in places of power who are pushing back against the Trump people and their extraordinary incompetence. And I didn't go into the corruption stuff and so on today, but I will remind you that we still have hanging out there not only this war, but also the Epstein files, the corruption, which is increasingly visible, and you get people like Senator John Ossoff calling that out more and more, and and the attacks on our troops, which people like Jason Crow in Colorado goes after, and so on. You're starting to see more and more of people coalescing around a vision of opposition to this administration. And that, I think, is where the power is resting right now and where the momentum is, and why it's so important to keep speaking up. Now, before I finish, I know I went on way long today. A lot of people have asked about Cuba, and I would say that just because I'm telling you the momentum is on the side of those who want to restore democracy and rethink America's position in the world, for example, does not mean that Trump is done. And one of his hallmarks is that when something goes badly for him, he lashes out in a really big way. So, for example, after the last No Kings movement, that was a Saturday. On that Monday, that was the Monday he started knocking down the east wing of the White House. Now, after the tariff thing that came out of the Supreme Court, which obviously has him furious, days after that, or maybe a week or so after that, I don't remember the timing on that, he goes after Iran. And I will point out that he is now talking about Cuba. He strangled Cuba's energy sector. So Cuba's very unstable right now. And he's talking once again about getting rid of the leadership of Cuba, which seems sort of to be his way of taking other countries under his control, essentially, rather, as I say, like Putin did. So that we'll see what happens and when. Democratic senators have introduced legislation to stop him from doing that without the permission of Congress. Of course, the Republicans are probably going to stop that, but Cuba is definitely a place to be looking right now. And I like I say, I don't know where that's going to go, but I would tell you that we're going to see this back and forth, lashing back and forth, and he is completely untethered. There is an expression from the old Navy called somebody being a loose cannon, and you might note it sort of as a rhetorical thing, but it literally, a loose cannon was a cannon. And if you looked at cannons on ships, they were often in midships for a number of reasons. But cannons are really, really heavy, and they would bolt the cannons to the decks. And then they would shoot the cannons off. But old cannons and guns do the same thing, right? They would recoil. So when the cannon went off, the cannonball would go one direction, but the cannons would have this recoil, and there were chains that held them to the deck so that they would chain back. They would bump back, but then the chains would hold them in place. Well, in a worst case scenario, the chains break, and the cannon then becomes loose. It is a loose cannon. And when you have a loose cannon, you don't know where it's going to go. Cannons can be it can be thousands of pounds, and it's ricocheting around either inside the ship, or it's smashing through the opposite side of the ship or the mast, or any number of places it could be. So Trump is now our loose cannon in the ship of state. And who knows what he's going to do one minute to the next. What I will say is our pressure, especially on elected Republicans, to stop this now before he does any more damage is more important now than ever. So again, we're in a really rocky time, but I urge you to maybe not to worry too much about the minutia because it becomes so overwhelming, but to recognize that Trump is no longer running the show. Trump is not able to run the show. Lots of other people are running the show. He's making orders and doing crazy stuff. But there's an increasing coalition of people pressuring the government to return to some sort of accountability and normalcy. And our voices in that are going to be crucially important going forward. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea Von Kampen.